Hey everyone, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're not visiting a royal court to sip mead with kings or galloping through sunny fields with knights. No, tonight, you're inside a stone fortress, high on a windy hill somewhere in 14th century Europe. It's early December. The last cart of late harvest vegetables just rolled through the gate, and the first snow has begun to fall. You're wearing 3 layers, but it's achingly not enough. Congratulations. You probably won't survive this winter. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're re-watching from and what time it is. It's always fun knowing where this reaches across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's long, cold journey together. You step through the great arched doorway of the castle, your boots crunching on a thin crust of frozen mud. The smell hits you first. Not rot, exactly, but the rich, damp stink of wool, smoke, and unwashed bodies packed inside for the season. The air is cold enough to sting your teeth, and already your breath hangs in little ghosts around your face. It's only going to get colder from here. That thick stone keep, it may look imposing and safe from the outside, but inside, it's a refrigerator made of granite. Your first impression is that the place feels dead. Not in a haunted way, not yet, but like the building itself has slowed down for winter. The corridors echo with every step you take, because the tapestries hanging on the walls can only do so much to muffle the sound or trap the heat. There are rushes on the floor, dried plant stalks strewn everywhere to catch spills and smells, but they crunch underfoot like brittle bones. Someone mixed in some herbs, maybe lavender or mint, to try to mask the stench. It barely helps. The only real source of light and warmth comes from the great hall. You follow the flickering glow and the distant murmur of voices. As you enter, a wave of slightly less cold air washes over you. A massive fire roars in a hearth, so large you could stand inside it. But here's the thing about medieval fireplaces. They're incredibly inefficient. Most of the heat shoots straight up the chimney. If you're not standing directly in front of it, you're still freezing. The Lord and his family get the prime spots. Of course, there are backed chairs positioned to soak up every last bit of warmth. For everyone else, it's a constant, subtle jostling for a position a few inches closer to the flames. The hall is crowded. Knights, squires, servants, and even some high-status villagers are all huddled in this one space. This isn't about socializing. It's about survival. Consolidating people means consolidating body heat and resources. You notice people aren't talking much. They're conserving energy. A few men are mending leather straps. Women are spinning wool with drop spindles, their fingers stiff with cold. Every activity is slow, deliberate. Wasting energy is wasting life. Let's talk about your living quarters. Unless you're part of the Lord's immediate family, you don't have a private room. You'll be sleeping in a dormitory-style arrangement, or perhaps just on a pallet of straw in a corner of a lesser hall. Privacy is a modern luxury. You sleep fully clothed, probably with your cloak wrapped tightly around you as a blanket. The windows are just small slits in the stone, covered not with glass, but with oiled cloth or wooden shutters that do little to keep out the biting wind. You'll wake up with frost on your blanket and the feeling that the cold has seeped into your very bones. Now, what about food? The feast you imagine is a fantasy. Winter is the season of preservation. The fresh meat and vegetables are long gone. Your diet consists of salted pork, dried fish that's more salt than fish, hard bread that could break a tooth, and peas, porridge a thick, bland stew of dried peas, day after day. For months, freshness is a memory, flavor is an afterthought. The goal is calories, not cuisine. Water is drawn from the well in the courtyard, and it's often partially frozen. You might get some weak, watered-down ale, which is often safer to drink than the water, but it does little to warm you. Sickness is a constant shadow. A simple cold can quickly turn into pneumonia in these conditions. With everyone packed so closely together, diseases spread like wildfire. There's no medicine, no understanding of germs. The castle's physician is more likely to recommend bleeding you or offering a prayer than any effective treatment. A persistent cough in the dormitory at night is a sound of impending doom. You learn to fear the sound of a sneeze. Sanitation is rudimentary. The latrines, called garderobes, are small rooms that jut out from the castle wall, with a hole that opens to the outside. Imagine using one of those in a blizzard. The stench in the summer is unbearable, but in the winter, the biting wind that shoots up from below is a special kind of misery. Boredom is a different kind of enemy. There's no internet, no books for the common person, no entertainment beyond what you can make yourself. The days are incredibly short and dark. When the sun sets around 4 p.m., the castle is plunged into near total darkness, save for the main fire and a few precious, expensive candles. You might listen to a minstrel play a song, or hear a story someone knows by heart, repeated for the 100th time. More likely, you'll sit in the dim, smoky light, trying to keep your fingers from going numb, just waiting for the sun to rise. The psychological toll is immense. The monotony, the cold, the hunger it grind you down. You watch the snow pile up outside the arrow slits, knowing it's not a beautiful blanket, but a wall, cutting you off from the rest of the world. Let's not forget the constant, low-level anxiety. Is the food supply going to last? The castle's stores are finite. The steward counts the barrels of flour and salted meat every day. If the winter is longer than expected, rations will be cut, first for the servants, then for the soldiers, then for everyone. Hunger makes people desperate. The camaraderie of the Great Hall can quickly curdle into suspicion and resentment. That person shivering next to you might steal your meager ration if you're not careful. The fortress designed to keep enemies out now feels like a prison, trapping you with your own dwindling resources and the growing desperation of your companions. And what happens if someone dies? There's no digging a grave in the frozen ground. The body would be wrapped in a shroud and stored in a cold, unused part of the castle until the spring thaw. A grim, silent reminder of your own fragility. You're living alongside the dead, waiting for the earth to be soft enough to accept them. This is the reality. Not a romantic adventure, but a brutal test of endurance. It's a fight for survival waged not with swords and shields, but with extra layers of wool, a full belly of stale bread, and the sheer will to see the sun again. Every sunrise is a victory. Every day you don't fall sick is a blessing. So as you sit there, in your warm room, spare a thought for those who endured this. The next time you feel a winter chill, remember this stone refrigerator, filled with smoke, smells, and the quiet, desperate hope for spring. It wasn't an adventure. It was a long, cold, and often fatal wait. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the past. I hope it gave you a new perspective. If you enjoyed this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical experiences you'd like to explore. Stay warm, and I'll see you in the next one. You've arrived. Welcome to the castle. Someone, probably a gruff guard who hasn't smiled since the last summer fair, gestures up a tight spiral staircase. Your quarters, he grunts. And you think, quarters, that sounds almost grand. But the reality is a little different. You're sharing a chamber, tucked away above the buttery. It's a space that feels more like a forgotten storage room than a place for a person to live. Now, being close to the kitchens does have one tiny perk. On very rare occasions, if the wind blows just right, you might catch the faint, tantalizing scent of roasting meat or baking bread. A ghost of a feast you'll never be invited to. But right now, there's no such luck. The room is a stone box, and it's colder inside than it was out in the biting winter wind. The rough-hewn stone walls seem to be sweating, glistening with a damp sheen in the faint light. You can see your own breath, a misty cloud that fogs up the tiny glass slit that they generously call a window. It's unshuttered, of course, and rattles in its frame with every gust, a constant, jittery percussion against the silence. Out of sheer curiosity, you press a hand against the wall. Your fingers come away cold and wet. It's a stark reminder of where you are. Let's talk about insulation. Spoiler alert, there is none. Zero. What you're wearing is all the warmth you've got. A wool tunic, probably scratchy and worn thin at the elbows. Underneath, a linen layer that, let's be honest, hasn't seen soap and water in weeks. If you're really fortunate, you might have a threadbare cloak to wrap around your shoulders. It doesn't do much, but it's something. Meanwhile, the higher-ups, the Lord, his family, maybe his top advisors, they're swaddled in luxury, thick, heavy furs, some even imported from distant lands, soft and impossibly warm. But don't get any ideas. Those treasures are locked away tighter than the castle gates after dark. Your designated heat source, a single, stiff sheepskin. The guard tosses it onto a straw-stuffed mattress and tells you to huddle. That's the official advice for surviving the night. Winter evenings in a place like this don't just arrive, they descend. Darkness falls fast and heavy, and it brings with it a kind of deep, bone-aching gloom that seems to seep right through the stone walls. Your only light comes from a couple of sputtering tallow candles. They flicker and dance, casting long, distorted shadows that writhe and twist on the walls, making the small room feel even more menacing. Down in the great hall, torches might roar in their sconces, but up here, they do more to create an atmosphere of dread than to provide any real comfort or light. Dinner is a humble affair. You sit by the small, smoky fire in the common area, holding a hard crust of bread. The truth is, you're savoring the warmth of the embers on your freezing hands far more than the stale taste of the food itself. The heat is a precious, fleeting commodity. The silence of the night is a fragile thing, easily broken. You'll hear the sharp bark of a dog from the courtyard below, the tired shuffle of a scullery maid's worn-out shoes on the stone floor, or a cough echoing from down the hallway. It's a deep, wet, rattling cough that sounds a little too familiar. A grim reminder of the sickness that thrives in these cold, damp conditions. It doesn't take long to realize that the castle is alive, but not in a comforting way. It's a living, breathing organism of decay and discomfort. You hear the faint, frantic skittering of rats nesting within the walls, their tiny claws scratching just beyond the stone. High above, in the dark rafters of the halls and chambers, bats roost, their soft, leathery wings occasionally rustling in the gloom. The entire structure breathes. It groans under its own immense weight. The ancient timbers settle with loud creaks and pops, and sometimes it screams. When the wind howls and whips through the narrow arrow slits and the murder holes in the gatehouse, it creates a sound like a tormented spirit finally breaking free. A high, mournful wail that will haunt your sleep. This isn't the fairy tale castle of storybooks. There are no tapestries on these walls, only mildew. There's no roaring fire in your hearth because you don't have one. This is the reality for the vast majority of people who lived and worked within these formidable stone fortresses. It was a life of cold, of dampness, of constant gnawing discomfort. A battle for survival, not just against enemies outside the walls, but against the very walls themselves. So the next time you imagine life in a medieval castle, remember this room. Remember the damp stone, the rattling window, and the single sheepskin. It paints a very different and much more realistic picture of what life was truly like. Thank you so much for watching and joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this glimpse into the past as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. We have so much more to explore together. See you in the next one. Ever wondered what it was really like to live in a medieval castle? Forget the storybooks. Forget the movies with their grand halls and roaring fires. Let's talk about the real deal, the side you never see, surviving a medieval winter. It's not a fairy tale, it's a battle. Imagine this, you're trying to sleep. It's not coming easy. You wrap yourself as tightly as you can in a coarse woolen blanket, pressing your back against the nearest warm body in the room for just a little bit of shared heat. But it's no use. Your nose is still freezing cold. A constant, icy reminder of the world outside the thin stone walls. Your sleep is broken, a mess of flickering dreams. One moment you're remembering a warm summer day, the sun on your face in the fields. And the next, you are filled with a creeping dread, the feeling of a winter that just won't end. You wake up constantly through the night. Sometimes, it's because your foot has gone completely numb, a dead weight at the end of your leg. Other times, it's the shuffling and quiet grunts of someone else in the crowded room, getting up to use the chamber pot in the corner. In those blurry moments between being asleep and being awake, a single thought circles in your mind. Does anyone actually make it through a whole medieval winter without losing their mind? Or without being completely filthy? Or, honestly, even just ... still breathing? It's a legitimate question when the cold feels like it's seeping right into your bones. And then, the morning comes. And somehow, it's even worse than the night. You peel yourself out of your sleeping spot, and your blanket is damp and heavy, not from rain, but from your own breath, condensing in the frigid air all night long. Your fingers are stiff, like little wooden sticks. You try to bend them, and it's a slow, painful process. The tiny stub of a candle you had is long gone, and it is still pitch black outside. You can hear the rooster crowing, a sound that should mean morning, but time doesn't really work that way anymore. Your life now operates by firelight. The days aren't measured in hours, they're measured by a much simpler standard. Did you have hot food or not? Most days, the answer is no. We all have this idealized picture of castle life, don't we? We think of grandeur, massive roaring fires in every room, endless banquets with tables groaning under the weight of food, and ladies in beautiful velvet dresses sipping wine from jeweled goblets. And look, maybe that happened for an hour or two during the Yule feast, if your lord was feeling particularly generous and wanted to show off. But that's the highlight reel. The vast majority of the time, life was about trudging through half-frozen, drafty corridors, your main goal being not to drop the single torch that's lighting your way. You read constantly hoping that the worn leather of your boots does unfinally give out and let the icy stone floor bite at your feet. You have to remember what castles were actually for. They weren't built for comfort. They weren't designed to be cozy homes. They were fortresses. They were built for one primary reason: defense. And in the dead of winter, everything becomes an enemy. Even the wind howling outside sounds like an invading army, relentlessly trying to breach your defenses. It seeps through every crack, every arrow slit, every poorly fitted window shutter, a constant, invisible siege. Let's talk about those roaring fires for a second. Historically, in many early medieval castles, the main source of heat was a large, open hearth right in the middle of the great hall. There was no chimney as we know it. In theory, the smoke was supposed to drift upwards and find its way out through vents in the roof. That was the theory. In reality, a huge amount of that smoke would cool down, get trapped by the cold air coming in, and just drift right back down into the room, right into your eyes, your throat, your lungs. That's why everyone's eyes are constantly stinging and red. It's why you have a perpetual raw feeling in the back of your throat, a cough that never quite goes away. There is no escaping the smoke. It's an ever-present part of your life. It clings to your clothes, it gets into your hair, it seeps into your skin, until you're not even sure what smells worse anymore. The stale smoke, or the latrine shaft just down the hall near the kitchen stairs. You live in a constant, hazy, eye-watering fog. And what about staying clean? The idea of a hot bath is a fantasy reserved for the highest nobility. And even then, it's a massive, labor-intensive undertaking. For everyone else, you'd be lucky to get a basin of lukewarm water once a week to wash your face and hands. The rivers and streams are frozen or dangerously cold. Water has to be hauled from the well, bucket by agonizing bucket, and then heated over a precious fire. That's a lot of fuel and effort for something we consider a basic daily routine. So, people just weren't clean. The layers of clothing you wore were not just for warmth. They were also your primary defense against the grime of daily life. Food, of course, was the central obsession. A successful harvest meant the difference between life and death. By midwinter, fresh food is a distant memory. You're living on what was preserved. That means salted meat, so salty it makes your teeth ache. It means dried fish, hard cheese, and coarse, dark bread that could be used as a doorstop. You might have dried peas, beans, and root vegetables stored in the cellars, turnips, carrots, onions. That's your diet. Day in, day out. A thin, watery stew, or pottage, with whatever was available thrown in, was the staple meal. It might keep you alive, but it wasn't exactly a feast. The constant threat of your food stores running out before the spring thaw was a source of deep, underlying anxiety for everyone, from the lowest servant to the lord of the castle himself. So, the next time you see a majestic castle in a movie, remember the reality behind the stone walls. Remember the cold that seeps into your bones, the smoke that stings your eyes, the gnawing hunger, and the sheer, relentless effort it took just to make it to the next sunrise. It was a life of incredible hardship and resilience, a world away from our modern comforts. It makes you appreciate your central heating and hot showers just a little bit more, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on this little trip back in time. If you found this interesting and want to uncover more truths about the past, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't want to miss our next video. See you next time. Oh, and remember that scholarly debate I promised. Here's the first one. Historians still bicker over just how cold it actually was in the Middle Ages. Some argue we were in what's now called the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that stretched from the 14th to the 19th centuries. Others think that idea is overhyped or was just a local phenomenon. But honestly, either way, when you're re-standing in a stone tower with zero insulation and nothing but a wool cloak to your name, cold is cold. Theories be damned. The feeling is what's real. By nightfall, again, you start counting down the days. You're not counting down to anything specific. Just ... Away from today, each sunset feels like a small victory. One step closer to the distant promise of spring. Maybe you let your mind wander to the green fields beyond these stone walls, thinking about warmth, open doors, and days where it doesn't hurt to breathe in. But for now, you tighten your belt another notch. You say a little prayer to whatever God might be listening, and you do your best to ignore the scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. Morning again, though you'd hardly know it. The sun doesn't so much rise as it reluctantly stains the horizon, a dull, miserable gray. There's no warmth to it, just enough light to remind you how cold everything still is. You sit up slowly, your joints creaking in protest. Your muscles sore from sleeping like a folded napkin on a mattress stuffed with straw and, yes, probably a few mice for company. And there it is again. You can see your breath. Always. You can always see your breath. Let's talk about what's for breakfast. Forget what you've seen in movies. There's no grand feast. For most people here, breakfast is a chunk of stale bread, hard enough to be a weapon, maybe softened in a bit of watered-down ale. If you're lucky, you might get a bowl of pottage, a kind of thin, grainy stew that's been simmering over the fire since yesterday. It's warm, and that's its main selling point. Protein, maybe a scrap of salted pork if the quartermaster is in a good mood. This isn't about enjoyment, it's about fuel. Your job for the day depends on your station. If you're a guard, you're heading back to the battlements, where the wind has a personal vendetta against you. It finds every gap in your clothing. You spend hours pacing, stamping your feet, your fingers and toes going numb, then painfully tingling back to life. Your world shrinks to the feel of cold stone under your boots and the gray sky above. You can share a story, a laugh, and forget about the hostile world outside the thick stone walls. This is the heart of the community, the social glue holding everyone together through the long, dark months. But then, the fire dies down, and the crowd disperses. You're left to face the night once more. You make your way back to your sleeping quarters. Maybe you share a room with a dozen other people, the air thick with the sound of snoring and coughing. You huddle together for warmth, a pile of humanity against the cold. You live in a fortress, a symbol of power and permanence, yet you feel so fragile. This massive stone structure is meant to protect you from enemies, but it can't protect you from the insidious cold that is your constant companion. It's a life lived on the edge, a daily battle for warmth and survival. And as you finally drift off, your last conscious thought is a simple, desperate hope that tomorrow the sun might shine a little brighter, that tomorrow might be a little less cold. Ever wondered what winter was, like in a medieval castle? Forget those romantic images of roaring fires and cozy feasts. The reality was a constant, bone-chilling battle against the cold. Let's take a walk through one and feel the history. As we step inside, the first thing that hits you isn't grandeur, but a biting dampness that seeps into your clothes. You pass a maid on her knees, scrubbing a stone floor. The water in her bucket has a thin layer of ice forming on top. Her hands are red and raw, but she doesn't even look up. In winter, the work didn't stop. If anything, it got harder. Animals still needed feeding. Floors still needed sweeping, and food still had to be cooked, if only to remind your stomach what warmth felt like. We moved towards the great hall, the supposed heart of the castle, the one place meant to inspire. But tonight, it's just another cavernous, cold space. The ceilings are high, the stone walls are hung with tapestries, so thin they barely stop the drafts. Yes, the fire in the hearth is larger than anywhere else. But it's a tiny island of heat in an ocean of cold. The warmth it gives off is swallowed by the sheer size of the room and the icy air pouring in from every crack and poorly fitted window. You find a wooden bench near the hearth, stretching your hands towards the flames like a pilgrim, seeing a miracle. You're desperate to absorb every last bit of heat. Historically, this hall would have been buzzing with life. It was the central hub where the castle's inhabitants gathered, ate together, and sometimes even slept in rows on the floor, huddled together for shared warmth. But tonight, and for many nights lately, it feels more like a museum after closing time. People drift through like ghosts, their shoulders hunched against a chill, their eyes hollow. The only conversations are whispered, as if talking too loud would use up precious energy. You inch closer to a large dog lying by the fire. It's not yours, just one of the castle's many strays that wanders freely. Its furry body is a small, living furnace, and you're grateful for the shared warmth. Here's a little-known fact about castle construction. You'd think they would have figured out insulation, right? Well, they tried. In some castles, the builders packed the cavities within the thick stone walls with materials like horsehair, moss, or even a mixture of clay and straw. The idea was to create a barrier against the cold. The problem, it rarely worked effectively. Worse, these materials often trapped moisture seeping through the stone, creating the perfect damp, dark environment for mold and fungus to thrive. So, you weren't just living in a cold castle. You might have been living inside a giant, refrigerated fungus sponge. Not exactly the peak of luxury living. Now, let's talk about the fires themselves. Keeping a fire going wasn't as simple as striking a match. It required a constant supply of wood, which had to be chopped, seasoned, and hauled indoors. A large castle could burn through an entire forest in a single winter. This made firewood an incredibly valuable resource. The quality of the wood mattered, too. Green, Unseasoned wood produced a lot of smoke and very little heat, filling the already drafty halls with an acrid haze that stung your eyes and lungs. Properly seasoned hardwood was the gold standard, but it was expensive and often reserved for the Lord's private chambers. This brings us to a debate that historians still have. How often were fires actually lit in the less important parts of the castle? One school of thought argues that, for the health and efficiency of the staff, fires were kept going constantly, even if they were small, smoldering embers in servant quarters or kitchens. The other side argues that fuel was far too precious. They believe fires were lit sparingly, perhaps only during meal preparation, or for a few hours in the evening when a room was actively being used. The rest of the time, you just had to endure. Based on the fact that you can see your breath and your toes lost feeling about 10 minutes ago, you're definitely siding with the fires were a luxury camp. Let's think about the daily routine. You'd wake up before dawn in a room that was likely as cold as the outdoors. Your first task would be to get a fire going, if you were lucky enough to have a fireplace in your room. Dressing would be a frantic race against the cold, layering on as much wool and linen as you could. Wool was the key. It's a fantastic natural insulator, and it stays warm even when it gets damp. Most people, from the lord to the lowest servant, would have worn multiple layers of woolen tunics, leggings, and cloaks. And what about food? Winter diets were ... repetitive. The fresh fruits and vegetables of summer were a distant memory. Instead, you'd be eating food that could be preserved. Salted meats, dried fish, hard cheeses, and bread made from stored grain. Root vegetables, like turnips and carrots, that could last for months in a cold cellar, were staples. Soups and stews were popular, not just because they were hearty, but because they were a hot meal that could warm you from the inside out. Drinking was also important. Weak beer or ale was a common beverage for everyone, including children, as it was often safer than water and provided much-needed calories. The cold affected everything. Ink would freeze in the inkwell, making it impossible for scribes to work. Water stored for washing or cooking would turn to solid ice. Even the stone itself seemed to radiate a permanent chill. The days were short and dark, and the nights were incredibly long. Entertainment was simple: storytelling, playing board games like chess or nine men's, Morris, or listening to a traveling minstrel if one happened to be passing through. Mostly, people just tried to stay warm and get through to spring. It's a stark picture, isn't it? The medieval castle, so often seen as a symbol of power and romance, was also a place of profound discomfort and hardship during the winter. It makes you appreciate the simple luxury of central heating, doesn't it? The next time you feel a draft, just remember, at least you're not trying to sleep in a stone room where the walls are secretly growing mold. Thanks so much for joining me on this chilly journey back in time. If you found this interesting and want to uncover more surprising truths about history, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what piece of history you'd like us to explore next. Stay curious and stay warm. Sound of wind whistling, a distant crackle of a weak fire. You stumble out of the great hall. The thin fabric of your cloak, saturated with the smell of smoke. It clings to you, a ghostly reminder of a fire that offered little warmth. Your stomach is a hollow, aching void, barely quieted by the single bowl of watery broth and the dense, tasteless chunk of barley bread you were given. It's the same meal as yesterday and the day before that. The short walk back to your chamber feels like a trek across a frozen wasteland. There's no fire waiting for you here. Of course not. The small pile of wood you'd painstakingly gathered is gone. Someone took it. Your eyes narrow, scanning the dimly lit room, settling on the man 2 pallets down, the one who snores like a dying bear, his breath fogging in the frigid air. A surge of anger warms you for a fleeting moment. You could accuse him, start a fight, demand your wood back. But the thought is exhausting. The energy it would take is more than you have to spare. You're too tired, too cold, to fight over a few miserable sticks. Defeated, you crawl into your bedding, a coarse, scratchy blanket on a straw-filled mattress that has seen better decades. You pull your 2 cloaks over yourself, a meager defense against the biting chill. You bury your face in the least filthy part of the wool, trying to find a pocket of your own trapped breath for warmth. You curl into a familiar ball, knees drawn up to your chest, back turned to the slender window slit where the wind relentlessly snakes its way inside. It's a sliver of the outside world, a constant, chilling reminder of the winter that holds the world in its grip. Sleep doesn't come easily. Your body is a knot of tension, every muscle clenched against the cold. But eventually, exhaustion wins. You drift into that murky space between wakefulness and slumber, and that's when you hear it. The castle begins to groan. It's not a loud sound, not a constant one, but a series of deep, guttural sighs that seem to emanate from the very bones of the fortress. The massive stones pop and settle as they contract in the deepening cold. The thick wooden beams above your head creak and moan, protesting the immense weight they bear. You've heard the stories, whispered around the hearths by old-timers, tales of entire rooms, entire wings, collapsing under the crushing weight of a heavy snow. They always add, only in the really old parts of the keep, of course. And you are in one of the oldest parts, a chilling realization. You squeeze your eyes shut, trying to convince yourself that last creak was just the wind, just the old wood settling, nothing more. In a strange, unsettling way, this has become your routine, the rhythm of survival. You wake, and the first sensation is always the freezing cold. So deep, it feels like it's in your bones. You shiver your way to the hall, huddling with dozens of others around a barely there fire, trying to steal a moment of warmth that never quite reaches you. You eat a tasteless, lumpy meal that does little more than stave off the worst of the hunger pangs. And then, you retreat to your freezing corner of the castle to begin the long, slow process of surviving another night. You don't think about comfort anymore. The concept feels like a distant dream, a story from another life. Your thoughts have narrowed, sharpened to a single point: preservation, survival. You become an observer of the subtle mechanics of warmth. You notice which flagstones on the floor hold their heat the longest after someone has walked across them. You learn to wrap the worn strips of your leggings in a very specific way, a tight spiral that leaves no gap for the wind to sneak in and steal your body as precious heat. Your standards have plummeted so far, you can barely remember what they once were. A dry spot on the floor is a luxury. A moment without shivering is a blessing. By the end of the second week, the memory of true, deep warmth has faded completely. It's like trying to remember the details of a face you saw only once, long ago. You dream of summer, of green fields and a sun that warms your skin. But even in your dreams, the edges feel cold, the colors muted by a persistent, imaginary frost. It's a bizarre reality, this life within the castle walls. You are surrounded by stone thick enough to repel an army, protected by ramparts and towers that have stood for centuries. And yet, you have never felt more exposed. The stone may keep the enemies out, but it does a terrible job of keeping the cold from crawling inside. It seeps through the mortar, radiates from the floors, and settles in the air like a permanent, unwelcome guest. The fortress is your shelter, but it is also your cage, a tomb of ice where the fight for survival is not against a visible foe, but against the relentless, invisible enemy of winter itself. You close your eyes, pull the cloak tighter, and pray for a dawn that feels just a little less cold than the one before. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the past. If you find these glimpses into history as fascinating as I do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. It really helps us bring more of these stories to life. See you next time. Scene opens. Narrator speaking in a calm, slightly melancholic tone. Imagine for a moment that central heating isn't a thing. Not just turned down, but something you only read about in stories. You're sitting on a bench, so cold it's hard to tell if it's stone or wood. It doesn't really matter. It saps the warmth from you either way. With every breath, you see a small cloud of your own making, a visible sigh in the frigid air. The atmosphere is a strange mixed scent of damp wool from your clothes, the lingering smell of grease from a long-ago meal, and the faint, waxy aroma of snuffed-out candles. You try to get comfortable, shifting your legs to dodge a steady drip of icy water seeping through the stone ceiling. It seems that even centuries of castle building could unsolve the simple problem of indoor rain when the frost on the roof melts. The cold makes you hungry, but the food offers little comfort. You tear off a piece of hard rye bread and dip it into a bowl of what generously could be called stew. It's lukewarm, a thick, goopy mixture of root vegetables. If you're lucky, your spoon might find a tiny, tough piece of salted pork. Chewing is a chore. Your jaw aches from the relentless cold. You find yourself wondering how anyone ever managed to run a kingdom in these conditions. Maybe that explains all the wars. At least fighting would get your blood pumping, keep you warm for a little while. You glance up at the walls, lined with what you thought were decorations, tapestries. But they have a much more practical purpose: insulation. They're meant to be thick panels of wool, hung against a stone to trap any precious warmth inside the room. That's the theory, anyway. In reality, these are faded and tattered, so thin you can almost see through them. One even has a jagged hole chewed through the bottom corner, a little doorway for a rat. Heat doesn't live here. It just makes a brief, fleeting visit before escaping back into the cold. You lean back, the chill of the wall seeping through your layers, and you listen. The room isn't silent, but it's far from lively. There are quiet murmurs, the occasional dry cough, the sharp clatter of a wooden spoon dropped on the stone floor. It's a symphony of survival, not celebration. No one has the energy for loud conversation. The cold steals your voice, your will. But then, you hear it. From somewhere near the fireplace, someone is playing a lute. The notes are clumsy, the tune slightly off-key. You can almost picture the player's numb, frostbitten fingers struggling with the strings. It's not a beautiful sound, but it's strangely comforting. It's a small act of defiance against the oppressive cold, a quiet proof that someone, somewhere in this room, hasn't given up completely yet. It's a tiny spark of warmth in a world of ice. So, the next time you feel a draft or you turn up the thermostat a degree or two, take a second to appreciate it. Think of the lukewarm stew, the dripping ceiling, and the out-of-tune lute. Warmth isn't just a comfort. For most of human history, it was a luxury, a daily struggle, and something truly worth fighting for. What we take for granted today was once a king's ransom. It's a humbling thought, isn't it, that the simple, quiet hum of your heater is a sound our ancestors could only dream of. Thank you so much for joining me on this little journey into the past. If you enjoyed this and want to explore more historical realities, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps, and I'd love to see you again for our next story. Stay warm out there. Have you ever wondered what it was really like to live in a medieval castle? Forget the fairy tale images of grand balls and cozy hearths. Let's talk about the brutal reality of a medieval winter, where the biggest enemy wasn't an invading army, but the cold itself. Picture this. You're in the Great Hall, the supposed heart of the castle. It's vast, stone-walled, and absolutely freezing. You'd think, with all their ingenuity, they'd have a clever way to heat the place, right? Well, some tried. There was this fancy Roman system called a hypocaust, where hot air was supposed to circulate under the floors. Sounds brilliant, doesn't it? A bit like ancient underfloor heating. The problem, it was a spectacular failure in medieval Europe. It was ridiculously expensive to build, incredibly difficult to maintain, and the engineering just wasn't there yet. The delicate channels and complex furnace systems were no match for medieval construction methods. So, what was the alternative? A massive, open fire pit right in the middle of the hall. And when I say massive, I mean it. We're talking about a bonfire, indoors. This wasn't some neat little fireplace. It was a roaring blaze that billowed smoke up towards a hole in the roof, a louver. And if the wind was blowing the wrong way, the entire hall would fill with thick, choking smoke. Your eyes would water, your lungs would burn, and you'd be covered in a fine layer of soot. So you had a choice: freeze in clean air or choke in smoky warmth. Not exactly a win-win situation. Now, imagine you've just finished your meal. And let's be honest, meal is a generous term for most people. You're huddled with dozens of others, trying to soak up any residual warmth from the central fire. You see the servants moving around with steaming pots. A warm drink, but hold on, that's not for you. That mulled wine or spiced cider, fragrant with cloves and honey, is strictly for the Lord, his family, and their honored guests on the raised dais. You can smell it, that sweet, comforting aroma drifting through the cold air, a reminder of a warmth and comfort you'll never know. For you, it's a mug of thin, weak ale, barely better than water. Or, if you're really unlucky, just gritty, icy water from the well. The simple pleasure of a warm drink was a status symbol, a luxury as far out of reach as the Lord's fur-lined cloak. You'd be lucky if the wooden cup you were drinking from didn't feel like it was freezing to your lips. It's in moments like these that the true purpose of a castle becomes clear. It wasn't built for comfort. It was built to intimidate, to project power. All that imposing stone, the towering walls, the echoing footsteps was a statement. In the summer, you might feel a sense of pride or security living within these walls. But in the dead of winter, that feeling vanishes. Instead, you feel trapped in the cold, stone belly of a giant beast. Every breath you exhale hangs in the air, a visible cloud, like a sigh from the beast's own lungs. The drafts are relentless, snaking through every crack and crevice, chilling you to the bone. There's no escape. The stone walls that keep enemies out also keep the biting cold in. You glance up at the nobles on the dais, the heart of this beast. Even they, wrapped in their expensive furs and sitting closest to the fire, look cold. They aren't laughing or celebrating. They're just enduring, same as you. The only difference is they're enduring with better food and softer chairs. It's a small, bitter comfort to know that even the powerful can't entirely escape the misery of the cold. As the weak winter sun disappears, which happens shockingly early, the hall descends into gloom. The only light comes from the flickering fire and a few precious tallow candles or rushlights, which smell awful and give off more smoke than light. The servants begin their endless routine, clearing away wooden plates or trenchers, sweeping the floor, and carefully tending the fire, adding just enough wood to keep the illusion of warmth alive, but not enough to be wasteful. You know what's coming next. Soon, everyone who isn't part of the Lord's immediate household will be herded out. The Great Hall, the only source of significant light and warmth in the entire castle, is shut down for the night once the Lord retires. Lingering is not an option. Stay too long, and you might be roped into a miserable late-night chore, like mucking out the icy stables or standing watch on a freezing tower battlement. So, you shuffle out of the hall, back to whatever cold, dark corner you call your bed. Maybe it's a straw pallet in a crowded barracks or a loft space shared with a dozen other people. There are no private, cozy bedrooms here. You huddle together with others for shared body heat, listening to the wind howl outside the stone walls. Sleep is less about rest and more about surviving until the morning, when the entire, freezing, smoky, uncomfortable cycle begins all over again. That was the reality of a medieval winter in a castle. It wasn't a romantic adventure. It was a battle for survival against an enemy that was everywhere and could not be defeated. The cold, a constant, knowing presence that made every day a struggle. So, what do you think? Could you have survived a winter in a medieval castle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this glimpse into the chilly side of history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Thanks for watching. And stay warm. You leave before you're told, stepping out into the corridor. Somehow, it feels even colder than before. The Great Hall, frigid as it was, at least held the residual heat of people. Out here, in these echoing stone passages, it's like walking through an abandoned tomb. Your footsteps bounce back at you, sharp and lonely. You tighten your thin cloak, your fingers already stiff, and head toward your sleeping corner, dreading the frozen mattress waiting for you. You pass a sputtering torch on the wall and hold your hands close, not really to warm them, but just to remember what warmth even feels like. The flame dances mockingly, a tiny orange speck, promising nothing, and you realize then, this castle may have walls 10 feet thick, a moat, towers, and guards, but it offers little protection from the enemy you feel most keenly. The cold doesn't attack you head-on. No, it lingers, it waits, it learns your name. By the 4th week of winter, you start making peace with the drafts, not in some grand, philosophical way, but just practically. The cold has so thoroughly infiltrated your body that noticing a new breeze through a cracked window slit becomes more of a curiosity than an emergency. You're already cold. What's a little more? The wind whips down the corridors like it's got somewhere urgent to be. It howls through doorways, sneaks beneath shutters, and tugs at the heavy tapestries like a bored ghost looking for attention. You wake in the middle of the night again, not because of nightmares, though those are plentiful, but because something scurries across your face. Maybe it was a rat, maybe a beetle the size of a child's thumb. Either way, it disappears into the rustling straw of your mattress before you can fully process the panic. You lie there in the dark, heart pounding against your ribs, staring into a blackness so thick it feels like it's pressing on your eyeballs. The only sound is the soft, rhythmic drip of moisture somewhere behind you and the dull clatter of shutters banging in the relentless wind. This is the reality of life in a medieval castle, stripped of its romantic sheen. Forget the grand feasts and noble courts you see in movies. For most, life was a constant, grinding battle for survival against the elements. The stone walls that were designed to keep enemies out were just as effective at trapping the cold. And let's talk about heating, or rather, the lack of it. The Great Hall would have a massive, central hearth, but its warmth barely reached the corners of the room, let alone the winding corridors and private chambers. The smoke often filled the room before finding its way out through a simple hole in the roof, leaving your eyes watering and your throat raw. Wealthier lords might have fireplaces in their private chambers, but these were inefficient beasts, consuming huge amounts of firewood while radiating heat only a few feet away. For everyone else, you relied on body heat, layers of wool, and maybe a small, smoky brazier if you were lucky. But even that was a fire hazard in a world built of wood and straw. And those beautiful, grand windows you imagine, they were mostly unglazed openings. Wooden shutters could be closed against the wind, but they did little to stop the drafts. Glass was an exorbitant luxury. So, you had a choice: light and freezing wind, or darkness and slightly less freezing wind. Most people chose the latter, living in a perpetual gloom that mirrored the bleakness outside. Now, let's get personal. What about hygiene? Water would have to be hauled by hand from a well in the courtyard. In winter, this meant breaking through ice, and the water itself would be numbingly cold. Bathing was a rare and elaborate affair, usually reserved for the very wealthy. For the common person, a quick wipe with a damp, cold cloth was the best you could hope for. The concept of a hot shower was centuries away. You were cold, you were dirty, and you were probably sharing your living space with a variety of pests. The food, too, was a reflection of the season. The bounty of the autumn harvest was a distant memory. By deep winter, you were living on preserved foods, salted meats, dried fish, hard bread, and pickled vegetables. Freshness was a forgotten concept. Every meal was a monotonous exercise in consuming calories to fuel your body's constant fight against the cold. Your teeth would ache from the cold and the tough. Stale food, malnutrition was a constant threat, weakening your immune system and making you more susceptible to the illnesses that thrived in the damp, crowded conditions. This constant, wearing discomfort shaped everything. It shaped your mood, your health, your very perception of the world. The romantic idea of cuddling by a roaring fire was an experience for a tiny fraction of the population. For most, winter was a long, dark tunnel with no guaranteed light at the end. It was a season of endurance, a time to simply hold on and pray for the first signs of spring. Imagine the psychological toll. Waking up cold, spending the day cold, and going to sleep cold. The world shrinks to the immediate need for warmth. The damp seeps into your bones, causing aches and pains that never quite go away. The darkness presses in, breeding superstition and fear. Every creak of the castle, every howl of the wind, becomes a potential threat in the long, oppressive nights. This wasn't an adventure. It was a siege. A siege laid not by an invading army, but by winter itself. And it was a battle that people had to fight year after year, with nothing but their own resilience and a few meager logs to see them through. So, the next time you see a majestic castle in a film, picture this reality. Picture the shivering servant, the drafty corridor, the endless, gnawing cold. It paints a very different and far more human picture of life in the Middle Ages. Thanks so much for joining me on this chilly journey back in time. If you found this glimpse into the harsh realities of castle life interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical myths you'd like me to explore. Stay warm and see you next time. Have you ever looked at a castle and thought, wow, living there must have been a dream? Well, let me pull back the velvet curtain on that fairy tale and show you the gritty, freezing reality. Welcome to life inside a medieval fortress when winter hits. It's not pretty, it's not glamorous, and it's definitely not what the movies show you. Let's start with the windows. You'd think a grand castle would have these huge, beautiful windows to let in the light. Right? Wrong. For the 100th time, you stand there, shivering, wondering why castles weren't built with actual windows. The answer is simple, and, honestly, a bit stupid from a comfort perspective. They were designed for war, not for weather. Those narrow slits you see are called arrow slits. They're perfect for an archer to shoot arrows out of, but they are utterly useless at keeping out the biting cold. They're basically wind tunnels designed to channel the iciest drafts directly into your living space. Sure, there are shutters, but most are loose on their hinges or just plain broken. In the slightly more luxurious chambers, and I use that term very loosely, you might get a piece of linen soaked in wax to hang over the opening. You'd watch it flap gently in the constant breeze, a flimsy, pathetic barrier against the elements. It does absolutely nothing. The cold seeps through every crack and crevice, a relentless invader that never retreats. Forget central heating. The very concept is centuries away. The only source of warmth is a fireplace, but they were notoriously inefficient. Most of the heat went straight up the chimney, and you had to huddle dangerously close just to feel a flicker of warmth, while your back remained frozen. With this constant, gnawing cold, something strange starts to happen to you. Every day, you grow a little more feral. The civilized person you thought you were begins to fade away. You stop flinching when a rat, a common and bold roommate, scurries across your path. In fact, you might even start giving them names. You develop a bizarre sixth sense, an internal GPS, for navigating the castle's corridors, based purely on smell. You learn which hallway smells the least like spoiled meat or human waste today. It's a grim skill, but a necessary one for survival. And forget about fashion. Practicality is the only trend that matters. You learn to live in layers. It's not a style choice. It's a survival tactic. You wear your shirt over your tunic, and your tunic over a heavy wool cloak. And here's the kicker. You never fully undress anymore. Not even to sleep. The idea of exposing your skin to the frigid air for more than a few seconds is unthinkable. Your bed is likely a straw mattress on the floor, maybe with a few scratchy wool blankets if you're lucky. You curl up, fully clothed, trying to preserve every last bit of body heat. Now, let's talk about hygiene, or, more accurately, the complete lack of it. Bathing. That's a laughable concept. Somewhere in the castle, probably near the massive kitchen hearth, there's a wooden tub stored away. But the logistics of taking a bath are staggering. Heating enough water to fill it would take hours of labor and consume a massive amount of precious firewood. It was a level of privilege that only the highest nobility could afford, and even then, it was a rare event. For everyone else, a quick splash of icy water on your face and hands was the best you could hope for. The castle didn't just feel cold. It smelled of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and the ever-present smoke from the hearths. And your feet, oh, your poor feet, they are a constant source of misery. They are never warm, and they are never, ever dry. The stone floors are perpetually cold and often damp. The leather boots you were issued in the fall have long since worn thin at the soles. The leather, constantly exposed to moisture and cold, has become stiff and unforgiving. Every morning, you go through a ritual. You wrap dirty rags around your ankles before forcing your feet into the rigid, cold boots. It's a crude attempt to add an extra layer of insulation, a desperate effort to delay frostbite, but it rarely works. Your toes are always tingling, a pins and needles sensation that's a constant reminder of the cold. Sometimes it's from the cold itself, other times it's from the sheer neglect and poor circulation. But you learn to listen to your body. When that numbness gives way to a sharp, stabbing pain, that's when you know it's time to start worrying. That's the feeling of your flesh starting to freeze, the onset of real, permanent damage. Losing a toe, or even a foot, to frostbite was a very real and common danger. You'd see some of the other castle dwellers, the clever or resourceful ones, employing a neat trick. They wrapped extra strips of cloth around their lower legs, winding them in a spiral fashion from the ankle all the way up to the knee. This technique, which would later be known as patisse, actually worked surprisingly well. It provided an excellent extra layer of insulation and support. But this wasn't standard issue. You only got these if you were smart enough to trade for the cloth, or if you were opportunistic. When someone died, you had to be fast enough to take what they left behind. It was a grim form of inheritance, but in a world where a strip of cloth could save your foot, you did what you had to do. Life was a constant battle against the elements, a struggle for the most basic comforts we take for granted today. It was a world stripped of all modern convenience, where survival depended on your resilience and a little bit of grim creativity. And speaking of creativity, here's a quirky little tidbit for you. There was a folk belief back then that sleeping with cloves of garlic stuffed into your socks would keep your blood hot through the night and ward off the chill. Did it work? Of course not. It was pure superstition. All it really did was make your feet smell even more interesting than they already did. And, as an unintended side effect, it just made the rats more curious. Imagine waking up not just to the cold, but to a rodent nibbling at your garlic-scented toes. It's a comical image, but it paints a picture of a world where people would try anything, no matter how strange, to find a little bit of warmth and comfort in the long, dark winter. So the next time you see a majestic castle in a movie, remember the reality behind the fantasy. Remember the freezing drafts, the constant dampness, the rats, and the desperate struggle just to stay warm. It gives you a whole new appreciation for your thermostat, your warm socks, and a hot shower. Thanks for joining me on this chilly journey back in time. If you enjoyed uncovering the not-so-glamorous side of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Let me know in the comments what other historical myths you'd like me to bust. Stay curious and stay warm.